Our journey begins with the purchase of 5 juvenile Apistogramma Cacatuoides. I brought them home from the shop and placed all 5 in a 29-gallon tank until I could figure out the sex of each fish. I fed them lots of baby brine shrimp, which they really seemed to enjoy. They grew quickly, and it was now fairly obvious which ones were the males and which ones were the females. This is the first sign of trouble. It's a small female, and she seems to have a problem with her swim bladder, which makes it very difficult for her to swim, but we'll get back to her in just a little bit. Sexing apistogrammas is fairly easy because the males grow much larger than the females. Here, 2 males are having a territorial dispute. This is the female that we saw earlier that had the trouble with her swim bladder. I suspected that the trouble may have been caused by me feeding them too many baby brine shrimp, so I changed their diet and the problem just went away. It could have just been a coincidence, or it was the cure. I'm not really sure, but either way the problem was solved. In the foreground, you can see a young male. He's only about 1.5 inches in length, and he's just barely started to get some color. Just in back of the male is a small female, and she's only about 1 inch long, and much to my surprise, they're spawning on the underside of a cryptocorn leaf, even though there are 3 coconut caves in this tank for them to spawn in. And if you look closely, you can even see that the female's breeding tube, also known as an ovipositor, is protruding from her vent, and this is a sure sign that she's laying eggs. Nonetheless, in the wild, there are no coconut caves or specially made apisto caves for them to spawn in, so the female will lay her eggs on the underside of a leaf, or in the cavity of a submerged log, or any other place where the eggs are hidden from view. The females usually become bright yellow when they're spawning, but this female is still really young, so that might explain her pale coloration. Nonetheless, male apistogrammas can form a harem-type situation where they spawn with more than one female, and I think that this is what might be happening in here, because there are 3 females in this tank and the other male is constantly being driven away by the dominant male and the females. So this male seems to have all 3 females to himself. In fact, that disturbance that you just saw was caused by the dominant male chasing away the other male because he got a bit too close to the spawning site. The female stays with the eggs and fans them with her pectoral fins to keep them clean and oxygenated, while the male guards the area around the nest. In the near future, I plan on trying to breed my apistogrammas in a tank that has no caves at all. Instead of caves, I'll be using a layer of dried leaves such as oak leaves as a substrate to see if they'll spawn underneath a large leaf, just like they would in the wild. Notice how the female turns on her side to expose her abdomen to the male as he approaches the nest. This behavior is very common when they spawn, and I've seen the same thing in several different cichlid species. These two fish are being incredibly calm and cooperative with each other, which is interesting because as far as I know, this is their first time spawning, so you'd think that there'd be a bit more tension between them, as well as some uncertainty about what they're doing. But this young pair are acting like they're old pros who've done this sort of thing many times before. I found it interesting that the males don't pass directly over the eggs in order to fertilize them. Instead, they seem to use their fins to create a current that then pushes their reproductive material across the eggs. And I certainly did not expect these apistogrammas to spawn underneath a cryptocorn leaf, but here they are, and I imagine that nesting out in the open like this will make this nest site very difficult to defend. The male is about to race off again and chase away another intruder. And obviously, they can move very quickly when they need to. The female stays by the spawning site to protect the eggs, while the male patrols the area around the nest. Here comes another small female who is quickly chased away by the male. I notice that she has some damage to her tail fin, so I'll be moving her as well as the other male to separate tanks for their own safety. A 29-gallon tank doesn't really provide a large enough footprint for 2 males and 3 females to get along without some ripped fins, and I'd hate to see one of them get seriously hurt. Nonetheless, this early spawning attempt failed. I'm not sure what went wrong with this particular spawn, but it was very unusual, and I never saw any fry from it. But less than a month later, I discovered that the same female was guarding a small group of wrigglers. Here she is, keeping watch over her young. She's a bit older now, so her yellow spawning coloration is a lot more vivid than it was 3 weeks ago. Another very noticeable difference are the dark lines that are now visible on the leading edge of her ventral fins. This yellow coloration and those black lines on her ventral fins are a sure sign that the female is either about to spawn or already has and is now guarding young. And I'm not sure if she laid her eggs under a leaf or if she used one of the coconut caves this time, but I do know that this small group of babies did survive. They're a bit difficult to see, but she has tiny wrigglers hidden right under here. And since they're still so small and not ready to swim just yet, I'm assuming that she didn't lay her eggs in one of the coconut caves, because if she did in fact use one of the caves, she would have kept her babies inside the cave until they were ready to swim. Her young are now free swimming and feeding on newly hatched baby brine shrimp and microworms. The temperature in this Apistogramma breeding tank hovers at around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pH remains fairly consistent at about 6.5. And some fish keepers have reported that the sex ratios of the fry are determined in part by these two water parameters. But these temperature-dependent sex ratios are fairly common for many different species, from reptiles to fish, with cooler temperatures usually producing more males and warmer temperatures resulting in more females. Supposedly, a water temperature of about 78 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit will give a more even ratio of males to females. Nonetheless, this female Apistogramma is watching me very closely because she's super protective of her young, which are only about 5 days old at this point. There are only about 20 fry in this spawn, but she's still quite young and that number will increase each time she lays eggs. I'm only feeding the fry live foods at this stage, and as long as I keep the water clean and warm, these babies will grow quickly. And in about 3 months, they should reach a length of about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters, which is right about the size where I can sell them. And then at 6 months of age, they should be mature enough to tell the males from the females. Apistogrammas like to stay close to the bottom of the tank, and I think that they really appreciate the fact that there are lots of plants growing on the substrate where they can hide. Here you can see one of the coconut caves that I've provided for the females to lay their eggs in, and I've arranged these caves so that the entrance to each cave faces away from the other caves in the tank. Nonetheless, there's a lot of tension in the Apisto tank right now because a second female is also protecting a group of babies on the other side of the tank. Here you can see 2 females having a territorial dispute right at the center of the tank while the dominant male looks on. He's in a difficult situation because I suspect that he is the father of both groups of fry, and it's his job to guard each of them, so he's probably not sure which side to defend. Here's that other female guarding her young. She's on the opposite side of the aquarium, and her babies are younger than the female we were just looking at a few moments ago. These babies haven't inflated their swim bladders yet, so they get around by using short hops instead of swimming. Their orange bellies are probably the remains of their yolk sac because I doubt that they've been eating baby brine shrimp even before they can swim. But I guess that it's possible because why else would she bring them out into the open? And it seems to me that it would be much safer if she kept them inside the coconut cave until they were actually ready to swim. Her cave is in the back left corner of the tank, and we'll be taking a much closer look at that in just a few minutes. Nonetheless, it's a constant challenge for the females to keep their babies safe from harm, and the males cannot be trusted to not eat their young, so this mother fish works tirelessly to make sure that he keeps his distance. Now let's change our focus from the females and their young to take a closer look at the dominant male in this tank. But before we talk about the male, I'd like to point out that this is a hydra, which is just one of many in this tank, and with all of the live food going into this aquarium to feed the baby fish, these hydra are going to multiply like crazy. I feel bad for this male fish because his instincts tell him to defend the area around the female and her babies, but the females don't really want him anywhere near the children, so he's caught somewhere in the middle. The female turns her back on the male and shakes her tail fin, which is her way of telling him to back off. But that doesn't stop this male from rushing to the front of the tank to challenge me every time I get too close to his family. So in human terms, his wife might make him sleep on the couch, but he still thinks that he's the man of the house. Now, he's not always this agitated by my presence, but it seems like he's in a really bad mood today. Maybe it's because he's trying to protect 2 different families at the same time, while still dealing with 2 mother fish who keep telling him to back away from the babies. He's so agitated right now that he's actually vibrating, and I'd be willing to bet that he's also creating some sort of sound to try and scare me away, as well as to warn the females that there's a possible threat in the area. Fish are far more sophisticated and intelligent than we give them credit for, and this is especially true of cichlids. I don't like to film these fish for too long when they get this defensive, but I had to capture it on film. Nonetheless, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on these particular fish. There are several different aquarium-bred strains that are much more colorful than their wild counterparts. And when I put out a request for these apistos at my local shop, I asked for the triple red variety of the Apistogramma Cacatuoides. And much to my disappointment, when these fish came in, I was informed that they were not the triple reds or even the double reds, but just plain old Apistogramma Cacatuoides. But I was eager to film these fish, and me being the nice guy that I am, I decided to take them home anyway. So I'm not really sure how colorful these fish will turn out to be, but I'm hopeful because they're still quite young and the color on both the males and the females is still getting more intense as time goes by. I plan on keeping only the most colorful fry that they produce, hoping that in a few generations from now I'll be able to improve the line by selecting for fish that have the most colorful fins. And while I'm on the subject of breeding, these fish were very easy to breed, and it didn't require any special efforts on my part. However, there was a bit too much aggression for my liking because, like I mentioned earlier, a 29-gallon tank is too small for 3 females and 2 males, but I expected that from the beginning. The 29-gallon tank was just a temporary setup until they were old enough for me to sex them. But what I didn't expect was for them to start spawning so soon. So I'll be moving a pair of these apistos into their own 10-gallon tanks so that I can get better footage of them as they interact with each other and then raise their young. I've now removed the subdominant male and put him in his own 29-gallon tank, but I didn't put a female in with him because I already have about 60 fry, and that's enough for now. It's important to always have an extra tank for the male, because once they're done spawning, you'll need to remove him, otherwise the female might do some serious damage to him as she tries to defend her young. This is the aquarium that now houses the subdominant male. I call it my Süßwasser tank because it contains a lot of Süßwasser tang growing on manzanita branches so that they look like trees. It's a work in progress and it's a bit overgrown, but it was the perfect place to hold the other male until he matures and I can decide if he's colorful enough to breed. He's hiding at the moment, but we might take a closer look at him a bit later on in the video. Okay, and now we're back to the dominant male, and he's causing a bit of trouble for the 3 females in this tank, 2 of which are guarding babies. But right now, he's more concerned with me and the threat that I might pose to his little harem and their young. And here comes a female right now to defend her young because this male has gotten a little too close for her liking. So she uses her usual tail wagging and even throws in some violent head shaking to show him that she means business. But he seems unfazed and is more concerned with me at the moment. The fin extensions on his dorsal fin are still growing, and the colors on his other fins are still developing as well, so he still has a while to go before he's done growing and gets all of his color. The male keeps trying to get close to the female's cave in the back left corner of the tank, and she keeps having to drive him away. I'll be removing the male soon because at this stage of the game he can only cause trouble for the females and their young, and their time would be better spent looking after their babies. Alright, so let's go have a look at this female's cave site and watch as these 2 fish try to work things out. This is the entrance to the female's coconut cave on the far left side of the tank, and in just a moment, one of her babies is about to make an appearance. However, this particular fry might not even be hers. Because in a harem-type situation like the one we have here, where more than one female is protecting fry, it's not unusual for one of the females to steal the other female's babies. And in some cases, a female apistogramma will steal all of the other female's children and then care for them as if they were her own. Now, whether this fry-stealing behavior is done intentionally or if it happens accidentally is a matter that's open to some debate. And I suspect that this baby apistogramma does not belong to this female, and it may have just followed her home or she stole it from one of the other females in the tank. So make a mental note of this baby's size and swimming ability as he follows this female back into her cave, because in just a moment we'll take a look at some of her other babies and you'll see that all of her other children are at a very different stage of their development, so I suspect that she may have stolen this baby from another female. There are several tiny babies right here that aren't even able to swim yet. They're much smaller and less well developed than the fry that I pointed out just a few seconds ago. And yes, I understand that not all fry grow at the same rate, and there are always a few runts in each spawn, but most of these babies are quite small and not even free swimming yet, while the one that we looked at earlier appeared to be much older and free swimming. So I suspect that the larger fry doesn't belong to this female, which makes sense because the other female had her babies a few days earlier than the female you see here. Nonetheless, it's fairly common in a harem-type setup for one mother fish to steal the fry from another mother fish. And this behavior may have evolved because taking fry that are slightly older than your own might be helpful because the older fry are more alert, more capable, and better at following the mother's directions. So these older adopted fry are able to set a good example for the younger fry, which would make it more likely that the female's biological children would survive and thus perpetuate this fry-stealing behavior. This is similar to the way a human child can benefit by having an older brother or sister to help them learn new things and warn them of potential dangers. And I know from my own experience that having both an older brother and an older sister was definitely helpful for me when I was growing up. Nonetheless, these mother fish are very protective of their offspring, but keeping their babies safe from harm is not an easy task by any means, so they have to be constantly on alert to any and all dangers. And in this aquarium, the greatest danger to her fry are the other females and the father of her children. I've paused the video here so that we can look at this female's tail fin, because this fin is one of the most vulnerable parts on these fish, and this is because of the tail-wagging behavior that they use when they're trying to drive away an intruder. So notice how this fin is completely intact with no visible tears or injury. However, tensions are increasing in this aquarium as the male Apistogramma tries to defend multiple females and their young. And here we are just a few minutes later, and this female Apistogramma is now very upset. Notice how the color on her face has changed, and if you look closely, you can also see that she now has a large tear in her tail fin. And I suspect that this injury was caused by the male, but it's hard to say for sure because it could have just as easily been caused by one of the other females protecting their young. And I believe I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. After the male and female spawn, it's best to remove the male because the females don't want him anywhere near the fry, so all he does is cause trouble and make it much more difficult for them to look after their young. And now, just a few minutes later, the female is calmed down and her colors have returned to normal. And as long as the water is kept clean, her damaged tail fin should heal without any trouble. These mother fish are very alert and they're very intelligent, so they're constantly scanning the area around the fry looking for any potential threats. And like all cichlids, they're also excellent parents. And as you're about to see, the females can be very aggressive when they feel that their young are in danger. Unfortunately, the males are viewed as a potential threat to their fry, so there's often a lot of tension and fighting when a male gets too close to the female's cave or her young. In fact, any species that tends to stay near the bottom of the aquarium can be a potential problem when the apistogrammas are guarding their fry. And Corydoras catfish in particular are not good tank mates for the apistogrammas because the cories are a little slow to catch on and they'll repeatedly wander into the apistos territory as they cruise around the tank looking for food. And these females will not hesitate to attack anything that comes near their babies, and this even includes fish that are much larger than themselves. Notice the tilted posture on the female where she exposes the ventral side of her body to the male. I've seen many different species of cichlids adopt this same position when they're courting and preparing to spawn. And it's often said that the female turns on her side to display her enlarged abdomen filled with eggs so that she can show the male that she's ready to mate. However, I don't believe that this is a reasonable explanation for this behavior, because it's usually the female who decides which male is worthy of her time, and they don't really have to convince the males to spawn. In fact, it's the males who have to convince the females that they're a good choice for a mating partner, and this is usually done through various displays of aggression, bold patterns, and bright colors. And this is why most male fish are usually much more aggressive and more brightly colored than their female counterparts. Nonetheless, I don't believe that the females tilt their bodies like this to show the males their swollen abdomen as an incentive to mate. Another possibility is that she's showing her abdomen as a sign of submission, and this is a common behavior in many different species, but it doesn't look like this female is being submissive at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. And I've spent many hours looking for a more suitable reason for this behavior, but all of my research has turned up very few answers, so I had to come up with my own explanation for why she turns on her side when the male gets too close to her young. Now, I've seen a similar behavior in angelfish where they tilt their body at a 90-degree angle so that they're positioned horizontally rather than vertically, and they adopt this position just before they attack their opponent with lightning-fast speed and the intention of doing the maximum amount of damage possible. So if you see your angelfish turning its body horizontally just before it attacks another fish, it's a good sign that you need to make some changes in your aquarium, or someone is about to get hurt, because this behavior in an angelfish indicates a very high level of aggression. Nonetheless, I've come up with two possible reasons for this tilted posture in my female Apistogramma. One, it might allow her to swim faster, which would explain why angelfish use this posture when they're really upset and they want to strike another fish as quickly as they can. But in this case, I think that this position allows the female to get a better view of the male, because fish have trouble seeing objects that are really close to them because their eyes are located on the side of their head rather than at the front. So once they get really close to something that's right in front of them, they tilt their body sideways to get a better view. And I think that this is the best explanation for this behavior, because this female is definitely not trying to show this male that she's ripe with eggs and ready to spawn, nor does she appear to be submissive in any way. As far as the male goes, I'm not sure what his intentions are with this female in her cave, but one thing I'm sure of is that she's not very happy about it. The male enters the cave and has a look around inside. There are babies in there, but I don't think he's interested in eating the fry. And I think at this point he might be afraid to come out because he has a very angry mother fish waiting to attack him as soon as he does. She is one determined fish, and she's also very brave because he's more than twice her size, but that doesn't stop her from entering the cave as soon as she can and promptly chasing him out. But he comes right back again as soon as he can, and he seems to be much more interested in her than anything else. A short time later, she brings one of her babies out of the cave and places it on the sand nearby. Then pauses for a little bit to scan the area for any potential threats before she returns to the cave. Now she goes back inside the cave and picks up another fry in her mouth and brings it to the same spot where she put the first one. And once again, she re-enters the cave to grab another one of her babies and bring it outside. And once again, she scans the area for potential threats, but this time she sees the male and her body posture changes as she prepares to defend her children. However, the male seems to have no interest in eating the fry because his attention is focused solely on the female. He probably wants to spawn with her, but she clearly has no interest because her main concern is protecting the children that she already has. But I don't think that he's getting the message, and he refuses to give up. A few of her babies try to leave the cave, and the male sees them, but notice how he makes no real effort to try and eat them. Here the female stands guard at the entrance to the cave while she watches the fry. The male approaches once again, and be sure to notice how fast the fry can move when they need to. Those tiny worms that you see in the water are microworms, and they're food for the baby fish. Once again, the male Apisto enters the female's cave to have a look around, and when he does, he scares a couple of the fry, who then come shooting out of the cave entrance at a very high rate of speed. Here comes one of them now. And here comes another one. These tiny fry are remarkably fast when they need to be. The female is now returned to find the male inside her cave, and she's not very happy about it. Some Apistogramma breeders use caves that have a very small entrance, just big enough to fit the female, but not the male. And in these setups, the male can fertilize the eggs from outside of the cave by releasing his milt near the cave entrance, and then using his fins to create a current that then pushes his reproductive material into the cave, where it will then fertilize the eggs. Here, the female sees the male approaching and then decides to go inside her cave before he gets there, which will make the cave easier to defend. Now watch what this male is about to do as he approaches the cave. He's going to swim through this tiny arch when it would have been much easier to just go around it, but I've seen both the male and the female do the same exact thing. I'm a bit curious as to why he would take this more difficult approach. And here's the female doing the same exact thing. Here, the male is about to stick his head inside the cave entrance, and when he does, one of the babies is going to come racing out of the cave at an incredibly high rate of speed. The tiny fry that you see right here might belong to one of the other females in this tank, because it seems to be trying to get away from this one, so maybe she's trying to steal it from one of the other females in this harem. And that might be the real reason why this male keeps chasing after this particular female. And speaking of the other females in this tank, let's take a look at one of them now and see how her babies are growing. This female's babies are a bit older than the babies of the female we were just looking at, and her yellow coloration has started to fade as well because she's a little further along in the breeding process. And just in back of her, you can see the coconut cave where these fry were probably born. You'll also want to make note of the number of hydra in this aquarium because their population has really started to grow exponentially. In fact, I've never seen so many hydra in one tank before. But there's a lot of live food going into this aquarium to feed these baby fish, and all of that live food also feeds the hydra as well. I've never seen a hydra catch one of these Apistogramma fry, or any fry for that matter, and I think that the danger that they pose to baby fish is greatly exaggerated. Nonetheless, the babies grow faster if they're left with the mother, so I like to leave them with her for as long as possible. And I assume the faster growth rate is due to the fact that she brings the babies to the best feeding spots, and her presence probably helps them to be a bit more confident, which makes it easier for them to find food. So these tiny fry are growing rapidly on a steady diet of baby brine shrimp and microworms, and I won't be feeding them prepared foods for another month or so. It takes 3 to 4 days for the eggs to hatch and another 3 to 4 days for the babies to absorb the yolk sac and become free swimming. At 3 months of age, they might reach a length of about 4 centimeters or a little over 1.5 inches, and you can usually tell males from females when they're about 6 to 8 months old. This little fish appears to have been born without a pupil in its right eye, but it's still alive and feeding like normal. Look at those fat little orange bellies filled with baby brine shrimp. Okay, and now it's feeding time for my pet hydra, and on the menu today are hundreds and hundreds of tasty microworms. Microworms are a type of nematode that I raise in containers of oatmeal. They're eaten by the adults, the babies, and of course my growing collection of hydra. This is a Malaysian trumpet snail, and it doesn't seem to be bothered by the stinging cells of the hydra, and I suspect that this might be due to the mucus produced by the body of the snail. And as you can see, there are several hydra growing on the snail's shell. And this is a ram's horn snail that also has a hydra attached to its shell and getting a free ride. This is the 29-gallon aquarium where everything that you've seen in this video was filmed. Right here was where I was surprised when the first female Apistogramma laid her eggs on the underside of a cryptocorn leaf. And over here on the left-hand side of the tank was where you saw a different female Apistogramma fighting with the male as she tried to defend the area just outside of her coconut cave. And all of this is just the beginning of the story because these fish are still growing and getting more and more colorful with each passing week. I've now separated the best-looking male and female into their own 10-gallon tanks so that I can film them in even greater detail. And since that time, I've bred these fish several times and I've captured some amazing footage, so I still have lots of incredible things to show you. But these in-depth documentaries take a lot of time to film and put together, so those projects will have to wait. But I can promise you this, you won't want to miss what I have to show you next. And you can help support this unique aquarium channel and these detailed documentaries by contributing to my work through YouTube's Super Thanks program, or even better yet, directly through the PayPal link on my YouTube homepage. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end, and I really hope that you have a beautiful day.